Um, I think the role of Premlata has to handle QA session. So we will inform you, Sangeeta, as in when she joins, we'll message you.
Okay, sure.
Okay, because ma'am is also there and sir has also joined. So I think we can begin the program.
Sure, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah, so over to you, Mehak.
Well, it is rightly said by Aristotle that all men by nature desire to know. With this, I wish a very pleasant and good afternoon to our Honorable Principal Ma'am, Dr. Harpreet Kaur, our guest speaker, Professor Rakesh Chandra, respected teachers, and all my dear friends. I, Mehak Agarwal, the third year student from the Philosophy Department, feel privileged to extend a warm welcome to everyone present here for the periodic lecture series on the topic Philosophy, Human, and Technology, which is organized by Astitva, the Philosophy Department of Mata Sundri College. I believe that at the end of the day, we all will surely have a lot to learn and take back home from this lecture series. Now, I would wholeheartedly like to welcome our principal ma'am, Dr. Harpreet Kaur, who has always been our guiding light to address the students and give her valuable inputs. Ma'am, you have always shown a lot of confidence in us and supported us throughout. We look up to you as an inspiration who is followed at every moment. With your expertise and knowledge and your great vision, you have helped our college to achieve new heights. Over to you, ma'am.
Sangeeta, is ma'am unmuted?
Yes, ma'am, she can unmute herself. She is co-host now.
Um, Requesting principal ma'am to please address the students. Ma'am, can you hear us? Sangeeta, kindly ensure that ma'am is there.
I can see her name, but I don't know. Should I call her?
Hmm. Yeah.
Ma'am, can you please call her because I'm not able to connect.
I think Principal Ma'am must have got busy with some other issue. I'm sure some pressing issue. Till she joins, I think I will take the liberty to welcome you, sir. In fact, on behalf of the Department of Philosophy, I welcome you all, our dear Principal Ma'am, who would, I'm sure, join us very soon, Professor Harpreet Kaur, Professor Rakesh Chandra ji, our esteemed invited guest speaker, colleagues and students. Today is the first lecture in periodic lecture series sponsored by ICPR on the topic Philosophy, Science and Technology. The impact of technology on society is undeniable. Technology and science have played a crucial role in human history to shape entire civilizations. Technological progress was the key for the emergence and downfall of empires. The development of hunting and farming tools allowed our ancestors to dominate our hominid species. The invention of wheel and writing, as well as the introduction of metal tools and weapons, were other landmarks in the history of technology. Many successive civilizations have contributed to the world advancement. Often, the development of technology helped these societies to dominate militarily, politically, economically their neighbors, as well as increase the welfare of their citizens. But the 20th century situation is totally different. It has seen a rapid development in the field of science and technology. Fourth industrial revolution has changed the dynamics of interaction between human and machines to a next level. We have witnessed revolutionary technologies like machine learning, artificial intelligence, and their applications like Internet of Things, humanoid robots, virtual reality, augmented reality, genetic engineering, nanotechnology, 3D printing, wireless power devices, and the list seems endless. We are gathered here on an online platform made possible by technological advancement only. In the time when the world almost came to a standstill due to the pandemic, it was technology only which helped the world survive and move on. We cannot deny the positive outcomes of this development, but on the other hand, if we see the other side of the coin, that is, we're also facing lack of emotional connectivity, lifestyle diseases, and isolation from nature. And in that case, we seem to really wonder about the future generations. The issue of future generations become very pertinent here. It is time, therefore, to revisit the relationship between human and technology through the oculus of philosophy. As we know, Upanishads and Bhagavad Gita reflect the philosophy of Vasudev Kutumbakam, Sanrakshan, and Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina. So, it is important for us to understand how to adopt this approach in a world gripped by technology. How to bring this harmony and internal peace is thus a very important questions that we have to ask. Today, we have got this wonderful opportunity to understand this relation as we have among us Professor Rakesh Chandra ji, a renowned personality in the field of philosophy, to speak on the topic Some Reflections on Science, Myth, and Philosophical Analysis. Professor Rakesh Chandra ji has been the head Department of Philosophy, University of Lucknow, Director, Institute for Women's Studies, Dean, Student Welfare, Director, Cultural Activities, and member ICPR. He has been a consultant with UNICEF on primary education and child labor. He has been recipient of UGC and ICPR scholarships and has been co-investigator of one UGC major project titled Pluralism on Pluralism. He has actively supported gender-specific programs of United Nations, SIDA, EZE, and Oxfam in India and Nepal. He has prepared the country report on gender for DFID titled Challenges and Milestones Women Empowerment in India. He has also co-authored the UNDP Gender Report for Uttar Pradesh. He has prepared the Gender Development Index with special reference to quality of life under the Center of Excellence scheme in 2009. He has worked with Dalit communities on girls' education and Panchayati Raj in Barabanki district of UP for over a decade. He has trained primary school teachers in 28 districts and prepared training manuals for joyful learning. He is on the board of Seva, Beti Foundation and Suraksha and has actively supported the Mahila Sankhya. He was nominated as one of the 5 representatives of UNICEF for He for She campaign. Great achievements, sir. Indeed, very great achievements. Congratulations, sir. His area of philosophical interest are philosophical logic, epistemology, analytic philosophy, feminism, and human rights. He has published several articles, books, reviews, and a book too. He has conducted a large number of refresher courses, workshops, seminars at ICPR Lucknow Center and the UGC Academic Staff College. He has delivered UGC special lectures at several universities. It is an honor to have you here with us as a speaker, sir. Thank you for being for taking out your time and being with us today afternoon. Thank you, sir. Uh, just, sir, I'll like to know if Principal Ma'am has joined us. Ma'am Principal, can you hear me? I think she must be, in some important meeting or something. She will soon join us. So, sir, it is over to you now, sir. Sir, you're not audible. You need to unmute yourself. No, 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 no. I can't hear you, sir. Sir, still you're not audible. Sangeeta, can you guide sir how to unmute
Can you
him?
hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Good afternoon, Professor Hemlata, and all the young people who are gathered here. It's my honor and privilege to be speaking to all of you on one small topic, which is related to the larger topic, which has just been introduced to you by Professor Hemlata. The question of looking at technology and philosophy. As I had earlier mentioned to Professor Hemlata, the topic, as it seems the broader topic of technology and philosophy, is actually a very interesting topic on which there's a long history. We know, as Mehek had started her talk quoting Aristotle, that we are all uh, people who desire knowledge, as mentioned by Aristotle. It's true that we are all people who desire knowledge, and which is evidenced by the fact that we derive sensual pleasure by the use of sensations. And from that very beginning, we have this distinction that, we are creatures with sensation, we are creatures with memory, we are creatures where memory and sensation together make up experience. And then we have the greater capacity of knowing causes in case of Aristotle. Going back to Aristotle again, we have a distinction drawn between techne, arate, and science. So techne would constitute of just the art of making things, as it were. Arate, again, is making things for specific purposes. But philosophy and science would be those which take us towards a further height or a further depth, if you may like, of knowing reality as it is, and that too, knowing the first principles as they are. Is the science of metaphysics possible? How is the science of metaphysics possible? These are the kinds of questions which we find in Aristotle. So there is a certain kind of a hierarchical model wherein the knowledge of philosophy, or first philosophy, as he said, metaphysics, is more fundamental. So what is the relationship in that framework of philosophy with technology would be that it would be the knowledge of fundamentals of the universal laws, while the others, when you are doing only technology, you may do it perhaps in absence of philosophical outlook or in absence of the other more fundamental knowing. So the relationship is actually a double kind of thing, that it's a hierarchical relationship wherein technology and arate are supposed to be inferior to the philosophical knowledge, which is the knowledge of causes, which is the knowledge of first principles, which is the knowledge of being qua being. And it is possible to have techne and arate without philosophical knowledge as well. So there is a hierarchy where one leads to the other, and there is a possibility of doing one without the other. Now, what is the most desirable thing to do then? The most desirable thing would be, perhaps, in this philosophical outlook, is to actually do everything with a philosophical perspective, with the philosophical knowledge of foundations, with the philosophical knowledge of the first principles. And that is why, as Professor Hemlata was just calling our attention to, in recent times of the pandemic, we saw absolutely fantastic use of technology, of bridging gaps, even connecting people across the board, expressing your kindness through actual help, expressing your concern through connectivity, and actually delivering things through that. So we saw a great deal of kindness also, just as we saw the great deal of spread of the pandemic due to technology. If there were no aircrafts, perhaps it would not have traveled so fast.
Sure.
Gandhi at one time in Hind Swaraj said that, a large number of diseases have traveled all over the globe because of trains. So there is a hazard of communication and expedited augmented communication. And then there is also the question about relief uh, coming from technology. So there are people who say that technology in and by itself is fairly neutral. What makes technology good or bad is the purposes that it is put to. And that's what we are seeing right now. But the whole questions of looking at science and technology has many aspects. And before I begin my paper, I also just wanted to share this with all of you. The hyphenated idea of science technology, which has actually taken a toll over the whole, or I should say, I use the word toll, but which has taken a great deal of currency all over the world, that whenever that you talk about, you say, oh, science hyphen technology. And you imagine that every scientific research must have a technological output. Similarly, even in philosophy researches, we are now asking, what is the throw up for society in terms of technology, in terms of benefits that will accrue to society by your work? So when you're writing a research proposal, you're writing a grant, there's a whole section on that which says that, okay, what would be the benefit of that? Now, this is a little peculiar, particularly for us as students of philosophy, because our masters in our heritage uh, of from Aristotle to Shankar to Buddha, all of them had somehow or the other spoken about the highest form of knowledge to be knowledge for its own sake. So, knowledge for its own sake, uh, Atmavidya, Tattvavidya, as it was spoken here, or even in case of Aristotle, as we were mentioning, both Mehek had started with that and we were carrying it forward, the question of knowing, being, qua being. Of course, it would have an impact in our understanding, which would reflect in our behavior and our attitudes. But the purpose is not primarily that, according to one view of looking at philosophy. While on the other, I think there is the other flip side of it, where I think we can be countered by an equally ancient and an important argument that why at all are we interested in philosophy, knowledge for a knowledge's sake? The question was, how do we lead a good life? And that is the old Socratean question. So, how do you lead a good life is actually a question of application. How it's a question of how do we actually conduct ourselves? How do we deal with other individuals? And what are the things that we use and how and with what kind of a perspective? So, in one way, despite the fact that there's oftentimes we talk about hierarchy, wherein in a more fundamental way, philosophy is more fundamental and technology is not, or sometimes we also want to have a disruption uh, of the variety that we want to say that there is a disruption and there can be a technology, there can be philosophy without necessarily its implications in technology. There are ways in which we can have a more reconciled view of philosophy, science, art, and technology, wherein we take all of them as enterprises into knowing, and knowing as it gets transformed into being, and being as being played out in our engagement with the world. So this was my general kind of a broad, straight thought on the general theme of human technology and science. I have a small paper which I want to share with you, which is, as Professor Hemlata informed, some reflections on science, myth, and philosophical analysis. My training is as an analytical philosopher, and generally, I am very often criticized for being a very narrowly foundational analytical philosopher cast in the old mold of particular one kind of philosophizing, that is the ordinary language philosophy. And many people find that my view of philosophy is fairly narrow. However, I stick my neck out, and I try to say something about science, myth, and philosophical analysis. It's very interesting to notice that many scholars believe that science is a product of the 17th century. So, and when they say that, they associate it with the rejection of mythology as a product of superstition and primitive minds. And they see that this is association of science is with a particular faith in reason, progress, and scientific method. The triumph of it, which we find in coming in modernity. So the modernity of the 17th century is characterized by a faith in reason, science, and progress. And there seem to be many responses to the relationship of myths and science. Some see that they are clearly opposed, as science concerns itself with truths and myths are not true. Some see them as not opposed to each other, but they are supposed to be dealing with different realms. Some others have a very complex view. They say that they are both products of the human mind and human creativity, and we need explanation for certain things, so we find scientific explanations and sometimes mythological ones. And so they are not necessarily opposed to each other. There's a possibility of integrating them. One of the most important figures, as we all know, in this area is Professor Claude Levi-Strauss. And he's one of the most influential thinkers who argues that we lose out on some things if we live purely on what we call scientific thinking. So if we are living only a life of scientific thinking, then certainly we are losing out on something, and we need to reintegrate them in the field of scientific explanation. He believes that the real separation between science and mythical thought occurred in the 17th and the 18th century. And he believes that before that, there wasn't much of that. And he's thought that it was necessary for people like René Descartes, Francis Bacon, Newton, and others to build themselves against the old generation of mythical thought. And Strauss has a very curious passage, which I quote. It was thought that science could only exist by turning its back upon the world of senses, the world we smell, taste, and perceive. The sensory was the delusive world, whereas the real world was the world of mathematical properties, which could only be grasped by the intellect and which was entirely at odds with the false testimony of senses. This is really so reminiscent of Plato, the divided line, to the world of hypothetical things, then the world of senses, then the world of mathematics, and then the world of ideas. Now, this is indeed, of course, to find that in a writer like Levi-Strauss is very peculiar, because we generally think that science would deal with sensible empirical knowledge, but here he's saying that it's turning away from the senses because the model of science that he's taking is the model of mathematics. So what is it that we mean by science? And this, I think you would all find as students of philosophy of science very, very interesting, that sometimes when people do philosophy of science, their model is mathematics. Sometimes when they do philosophy of science, their model is physics. And it is only in the past 20, 30 years that more people are taking to physical sciences also as model, where definitions are not so fixed. Otherwise, the model was aspirationally mathematical precision. So are we mentioning Bacon and Newton, whose faith in experimental and empirical methods, can they be called those philosophers who are scientists who are turning away from senses. So if Strauss is talking about science as turning its back to the senses, then certainly not Bacon and not Newton. So Strauss thinks that it is in the late 20th century that the most sense data is being integrated into sciences, which again I find very peculiar because I thought that this was always so. But he's the most influential figure, and we cannot do any kind of anthropological studies without referring to Strauss or even talking about mythology without him. So he also has a peculiar idea that philosophical problems about the nature of mathematics in terms of Plato's innate theory or John Locke's tabula rasa are resolved by neurophysiology of vision. So some may plead that this line of argument does not appreciate the self-perception of philosophy uh, by some philosophers like me and many others as a second order activity, because many of us think that philosophy is not a first order activity but a second order activity where we are actually not talking about things but about concepts, and we are analyzing concepts. And what we are saying is that this is not just a peculiarity of the 20th and the late 20th century or the 21st century. If you are to take the evidence of Arthur Papp and the others, they would say that even Socrates and the others were doing philosophical analysis, because when they are asking a question, what is justice, actually the question is asked in the form, what do you mean by justice? So it's not a first order thing that what is justice in terms of its operations, but what is the meaning that you give to the term justice when you are talking about justice. Strauss does mention his early desire to get out of philosophy, and this I think is very telling, because we used to make a distinction between meaning of a term and its justification. And we thought that we are actually concerned with both meaning and justification, not with the concrete particulars. But Strauss says that he actually at one time wanted to escape from philosophy and go to anthropology, where he confronted the problem of finding order behind something which are apparently disordered and absurd. Strauss calls attention to the fact that there's a great quest for the invariant elements among superficial differences which are at the core of the structuralist approach, that there is a structure in everything. And he talks of two ways of proceeding in science, reductionism and structuralism. In the reductionist story, when it is possible to find out that the very complex phenomena at one level can be reduced to simpler phenomena, and that too is a process or simpler processes. And sometimes when the phenomena is too complex to be reduced, by looking to the relationship and noticing what kind of original system can be made up. Nature seems to have only a limited number of procedures which reappear at different levels. Strauss recounts that his own work on kinship and marriage rules, as well as mythology, there are reappearances all over the world in the same pattern. So when he was looking at different communities and their relationship of kinship, and he was also trying to trace their history, he was finding that everywhere in different corners of the world at different times, they almost reappeared in the same form. Strauss very perceptively remarks about the close relationship between meaning and rules. Rules represent a basic need for order in the human mind. And since after all, the human mind is the only part, also only a part of the universe, the need perhaps exists as there is an order in the universe which is not a chaos. So our looking for rules, he's saying, is a mental phenomenon. We are as minds part of the universe. So we are looking for rules, and these rules exist in the universe, which is also part of the phenomena outside. So he's somehow or the other giving a naturalistic explanation, just as I keep on going back to what Mehak said in the beginning. We are by nature knowing animals, people, loving reality, the kind of thing which Aristotle begins his search. So Strauss is claiming that though science will never give us all answers, it will increase the number and quality of answers that we are able to give. And he thinks that it is a mistake to describe oral cultures as primitive. And this, I think, is very important, India was an oral culture for a very long time. And we also know that the Greeks had a very great deal of trouble about writing. There's a lot of argument about saying that there should be no writing, because they say that if there would be writing, you would start depending upon memory. And you would stop using the use of memory, which is so essential. And the direct contact would be taken away. So the lingua parole distinction and the old Greek debates are revived. So calling the cultures which did not go into writing as primitive is absolutely not acceptable to many of us. And also we now have Strauss's authority. So people without writing are perfectly capable of disinterested thinking, because we say that philosophy is disinterested thinking. And as a philosopher or as a scientist, Strauss explains that the way of thinking which is disinterested or intellectual does not mean that it is equal to scientific thinking. All disinterested thinking is not scientific thinking. It remains different and inferior in many ways. It remains different because it aims to reach by the shortest possible means not only a general but a total understanding of the universe. So this is what he characterizes as the mythological thinking, that where you want to have a shortcut to an explanation of everything, that you do not understand anything, but you want to have an explanation of everything in a shortcut. So you quickly have a myth. This is in contrast to scientific thinking, which proceeds step by step, trying to explain from the limited phenomena and moving to others. Strauss called it the totalitarian ambition of the savage mind. This ambition does not succeed. We are able to achieve mastery over nature through scientific thinking, but myth does not give man more material power over the environment. It gives man an illusion of understanding. So the purpose of both is to get an understanding and a control, but myth is not able to give us the total control over environment, while science does, because it is more methodical, more step-by-step movement. Interestingly, and here I remember a favorite of all of us, Immanuel Kant. And you remember that in the third section of the Critique of Pure Reason, in the dialectic, which is also called the Logic of Illusion, he says that we have a natural tendency to go beyond the limits of actual and possible experience. But when we do go there, as part of a natural tendency, we end up in paralogisms and antinomies. So he is not denying the naturalness of that, but he's also saying that despite being natural, they'll end up in trouble, in paralogism, in antinomies, which have to be then cleared up by some effort. Strauss argues that greatness and superiority of the scientific explanation lies not only in the practical and the intellectual achievement, but in its power to explain its own validity, as well as, to some extent, what is valid in mythological thinking. So it explains its own validity and also the validity of mythological thinking. Strauss also sympathetically looks at the alternative accounts of events given by families and people of the same event, and suggests that the gap which exists in my mind to some extent between mythology and history can probably be bridged by studying histories which are conceived as not at all separated from, but in continuity with mythology. So the same family will describe the same incident in different voices. Just as children who come after a play, they say, "Isne cheating kar liya," then they will give three different accounts and the same story. So while comparing myth with music, this is again a very interesting thing. Strauss is comparing mythology with music, and he says that if you look at myth and music, he charmingly says that there is a meaning in music and sounds interdependence. And he says that it is in this, that music lies in the sound element, which takes over and not the meaning. Similarly, in the case of mythology, it is perhaps to be understood here that meaning, when we are talking about here, is not in terms of the pure semantic meaning. You remember one very important little book which came something like 30 years back by Nancy Nersessian and Nelson Goodman, where he said that, the idea of meaning needs to be expanded and it should be replaced by an idea of significance. The idea of knowledge must be expanded and must be expanded to the idea of acceptability, and the idea of truth must be again expanded in terms of to be taken in terms of understandability. So, because what he said that if the idea of meaning is expanded to involve significance, then you will be able to talk about significance of music, meaning of art, all of that. So it is perhaps to be understood that meaning here is not semantic meaning. It is educative to read again a very, very old essay, which I refer to, which is called Myth and Science. And this is written by Tito Vignoli, who is a very conscientious person, and through very conscientious, close, honest research and what he calls humble love for truth, traces the growth of myth and science in man and animal. This is interesting. The subjectivity of which animals and man are spontaneously conscious in every internal and external phenomena, the subsequent edification of ideas even after though they have attended.
What could be the difference between myth and
Explanation, right? Yes, responding to this question, I think both mm, these people, Strauss and Vignoli and the others, would say that they both science and myth are trying to give explanation. The purpose of both is to give explanation. The difference between them, as in Strauss, would be that one gives a quick explanation, which is global, without really having the wherewithal of an explanatory power and a technology to operate and transform reality. While in the case of science, it is a more modest kind of a worldview, which also serves the same purpose. So the subjectivity of now,
edit and understanding.
yeah. So both of them will contribute to understanding. Both of them would have the idea that they will lead to technological transformation and control over the world. But according to Strauss, one is too quick and does not have a method to it, as it is in the case of science. The myth is often understood in its most general and comprehensive nature, the spontaneous and the imaginative form, in which human intelligence and human emotion conceive and represent things in general. It is psychical and physical mode of projection, that you project certain of your psychical and psychological fears and aspirations and desires, and they are not accidents in a life of primitive people. They are not vague conceptions of things due to erroneous interpretation. So they are not hallucinatory or the other. They are words and phrases which are not just fanciful creations of ignorant minds, but they would perhaps be better seen as a special faculty of the human mind, inspired by emotion, which accompany and animate these products. So you look at a tree and get sustenance from that, and you create a mythology of it as being the sustainer of the world. So it's a projection, not an erroneous projection. It is inspired by emotion, the kind of thing that you say, oh, this is Mother Ganga. Now, the Mother Ganga story and the mythological story that you create in and around it are not erroneous stories. They are stories of actually the water gives sustenance to your life. It is not an ignorant idea. But it has an added emotion that you're not just treating it like a tap water. You're adding more to it. And this faculty persists as an innate function of intelligence, according to a lot of these anthropological and psychological minded scholars. So they are studied through a collection of ethnographies, comparative studies of language, and studies in normal and paranormal psychology. And they say that why at all do people do myth making? Animation of all phenomena is part of the animal kingdom's psyche. So all animals do that. So myths evolve, as does human thought. So in Greece, for instance, even before Thales, the first philosopher, as we say, there were ideas which animated every force of nature. and these are part of the world. It is curious why human personality or personify all phenomena, first vaguely personifying all phenomena and projecting themselves into them, and then exercising a distinct purpose of anthropomorphism. It is interesting to consider that when scholars study in detail the primitive genesis and evaluation of myth, they notice that though the matter of thought was mythical, the method used could be called scientific. It is in fact scientific process to observe spontaneously at first and then deliberately the points of likeness and unlikeness between special objects of perception. We must rise from the particular to general, from individual to species, thus enlarging the circle of observation in order to arrive at types, laws, and ultimate unity of all, or at least what is supposed to be a unity. Because that they have said that that unity is too quickly arrived. So the logical form of the mythical and scientific thought is no different. It's much the same. Science is seen by some as depersonification of the myth. This is a very interesting phrase. Arriving at a rational idea of which was originally a fantastic type, of divesting it from the wrappings and the symbols. So some scholars argue that in the natural evolution of myth, man passes from the extrinsic mythical substance to the intrinsic ideal of some intellectual process. And when the types have become ideas, he carries on intrinsically the entification process, that you make it into an entity, and which he first applied to the material and external phenomena. Gradually, as we attempt to become more rational and get more rational explanations of physical phenomena, man attains an ultimate conception which expresses direct cosmic laws, and he regards these laws as substantial entities, which were in their original polytheistic forms were gods.
Personal aspect of scientific facts, can we say that our understanding of the world through certain theories
Yes.
proposed
So,
by various
right. So this is exactly what I'm trying to say, that the process remains scientific. And when you are looking at these cosmic laws, he regards these laws as substantial entities, which were in their original polytheistic forms only gods. So the natural forces are no longer personified as anthropomorphic beings, but laws of physics. So what was only considered to be that, okay, these gods were doing this, subsequently then are, when you find a pattern out of it, they become the laws of physics and are transformed into material subjects, which are still analogous to human consciousness and tendencies. And this is the way it is, of course, in a way idolatrous, that you are making idols out of those things. But it is not really anthropomorphic. Science is closely related to human freedom, and this I think is very crucial. Humans in error and illusion were in servitude of nature and their fellow men. Freedom to some is an offspring of science against the despotism of ignorance. And so how we seek freedom, we as modern humanists, we want to seek freedom both from God, but as scientists, we also want to seek freedom from nature. We don't want to be in complete control of nature. So nature has decided finitude, nature has decided disease, nature has decided danger. But we, again, through certain part of nature which is given to us in form of intelligence, we are constantly trying to overcome and transcend that. So good wise men who love the dignity of mankind and welfare of society and of the individual show reverence for freedom and science. Most benefits we enjoy now of civil, scientific, and material nature are products of freedom and science. Science is a constant, vigilant generator of social improvement, and the most tough enemy of the despot, of an oligarchy of the multitude, whether religion or secular. And this, I think, is very important. We need to see that, as Professor Hemlata was mentioning, that what has been the advantage recently that we experienced of science and technology. One of the biggest advantage that we found, that this point of being completely isolated and alienated. Because if you would remember, I imagine that if 20 years back, if something like this had happened, then we would all die of depression without connectivity and the others. Even with this, we are finding that there's so much of anxiety and depression. But the kind of connectivity then also a certain kind of information, supposing you get one information about something that, no, this is happening. Maybe the government wants to tell you something, or maybe the Chinese government wants to tell you something, or the American government. You have 300,000 other channels of information which can come to you, by which you can counter that and exercise your freedom. So what does freedom consist in? Freedom consists in choice. You have a choice. Now, does choice and freedom together lead to everything good? Not necessarily. There has to be rationality, because how do you exercise that? And that rationality will come through many other things, in which we think that the human biological nature of survival, apart from the human normative nature of universal compassion, etc., all of them are at work. So there is a normativity and a facticity, both of which involved in the human being, which are philosophically well discussed, which will take care of this. So whether it is the tyranny of religious bigotry, or whether it is the tyranny of the secular part, because we keep on talking about the terrible happenings of religious dogmatism, but the secular dogmatism is equally problematic. Look at the whole regimes of the communist China and the Soviet Union, or even the Nazi Germany. They called themselves socialist democrats. Hitler called himself a socialist democrat. So we notice a close relationship between truth and freedom. And this, I think, reminds me of the title of Richard Rorty's interviews, which is called Take Care of Freedom, and Truth Will Take Care of Itself. So Vignoli concludes in his charming essay on myth and science, carefully stating that he does not want to erect science and liberty into fetishes to be adored. That no, freedom is all important, or science is important. They're only sacred means to more sacred end. And what is the more sacred end? To enable men to practice, and not merely to apprehend the truth. This I find is hugely problematic in the present day. As I said in the beginning, that I am still an old-fashioned analyst who believes in truth, who believes in knowledge, who believes in philosophical analysis. But in the past 30, 40 years, we find there's this hugely fashionable voice of the postmoderns, skepticism of universal narratives, Rorty's strong anti-foundationalism, all sorts of people in the postmodern world trying to question the very idea of universality and the others. And then there would be a problem that, so search for truth would be taken by them itself as a big mistake, a historical mistake, which has ancient origins from Plato to Kant on the one hand, to Heidegger and Husserl on the other. So they would say that. But I, as I said, I'm sticking my neck out, that science and freedom are valuable insofar as they are useful for us. Also, I think philosophy, because they put us to the primary search, which is the search for truth. So that we are exercising science and freedom are valuable in only so far as then they teach us to persuade and enable us to improve ourselves and others, to exercise every private and public virtue, to claim only what is due to ourselves while making sacrifices also for public good, to have a respect for humanity, to venerate knowledge, not only insofar as it is combined with virtue, to attempt to every way to alleviate the miseries of others, to deliver their minds from ignorance and error, to do the right for its own sake without necessarily coveting rewards in heaven or in earth, to submit to no dictation but to truth and goodness. And this, I think, is a very old-fashioned hope which I continue to have, that truth and goodness go hand in hand. And I really again go back to the master Aristotle, where the idea of reason is closely related both to truth and to virtue. Now, how do we explain the intentionality of myth, which is again a very big problem? So Bronislaw Malinowski, who's again a very big figure in this discussion, advocates a very pragmatic approach. He says that as someone interested in the economic dynamics of the primitive social world, he saw that primitive man was a practical being who resorted to the magical rites. Only his everyday scientific knowledge did not prove to be effective. Strauss, as we noticed earlier, takes a symbolic analytical structural approach where he does not treat myth as a disease of language, but as a religious cultural art form. So it is this nature of myth as such which permits us to uncover its own inherent genius and to understand it as well as thought out structural reality demanding detailed study of words, symbols, and images. Through a series of symbols which form complex interrelationship in the mythical structure, the aim is at the bottom the resolution of life's anomalies, the transformation of natural disorder into culturally understandable values. The emphasis is upon rational, humanistic, existential concern for man. So you have Mircea Eliade, the great scholar from Chicago, who insists that behind and beyond the pragmatic function of the linguistic structure lies the conception, gestation, and the birth of the myth out of the depths of genuine religious experience. But their religion has a more Kierkegaardian meaning. It is ultimately this element of the religious experience of the sacred, which is the true source of its structure, practicability, and also respectability. Between the position of taking myths as based on religious experience, functionalism, structuralism, I do seem inclined to favor the position which explains myths as our natural disposition. To animate and extrapolate for explanation, which when further rationalized, makes self-reflexive and depersonified, gives us science. So it's the same thing which goes as science when depersonified and gives us freedom and also gives us the possibility to serve humanity. I also seem to agree that the value of science is instrumental to human flourishing, and the idea of human flourishing involves the whole gamut of thought which we find very well enunciated in the idea of human capabilities, which has now become very popular with Amartya Sen, Martha Nussbaum, Samina El-Khairi, which goes back to Rousseau, which goes back, of course, to Marx, and which again goes back to Aristotle. So how do I position myself and the historical account of myth and science in my picture of philosophy? It's a deeply troublesome question, and I have largely been seen as a philosopher, as I said, who argues for philosophical a priorism and a cultivated benign blindness to the contingencies in formulation of general principles of engagement. My position so far to understand myth and science as both natural human creations, where science provides greater freedom and reflexivity, can be seen as an analytical exercise, which is context sensitive, but does not try to explain away the ideas as cultural products of the times. So it's not just something that it's a product of a culture. I may also plead that my cultural politics may be seen as the politics of analytical philosophy, which is the politics of democracy and liberalism and peace field work. So are we to understand that there is no one Archimedean standpoint, but there are several mutually incompatible Archimedean standpoints of view, which is again very problematic? Are we to understand as historical social cultural products, all views are justified, including the most oppressive and the unfair, which is again, I'm not pleading. So are we to understand that standpoints of one are not available to the other or the outsider, which I find very dangerous, because then the standpoint theory, if we say that men can't understand women, the whites can't understand the blacks, the older people cannot understand the children, then we are in one way absolving them of the responsibility, because this is my general argument that ought implies can. So if I cannot even understand the other, how can I be held responsible for doing or not doing something of either commission or omission? So some kind of a communicative transparency has to be allowed. So are we saying that we are necessarily ignorant and not responsible, or not guilty? And does sociology-oriented epistemology give us a space for self-creation and improvement? This is a very, very troublesome questions which I have. So, but in at the face of this sharp competition and fight for survival, typical of the global deregulated capitalist society in which we are living, individuals feel very powerless. Maybe group solidarity, ethnic and racial groupism seem to be a cheap medicine, that, let the Dalits get together, let the women get together, let the community people get together. But I think it's a cheap medicine for safety and certainty. as cultures and communities are invented to feel safe. But there is, I think, a word of caution. And I again go to Richard Rorty, who's again, I find him both troublesome and fascinating, that we do need to belong. And so we create communities. The best communities are ones which are flexible enough to allow their members a lot of room for self creation. We need to develop a secular culture for social progress. Religion and myths have a totalizing metaphysics. The safer method for the enterprise like this is perhaps, according to me, still the method of philosophical analysis. So that's where I close my pleading once again for my old fashioned kind of philosophizing, which is analyzing concepts, finding their interconnections, looking at their cause history. And I still believe that a large number of troubles are created because of confusions, and so many confusions get sorted out when we engage in them. The one thing which I agree is that this is not a once and for all enterprise, that we are some in an a priori model, once and for all, we'll clarify the concepts and it'll be clear, as in the old fashioned way. Again, we used to say that philosophy is the handmaiden. And again, the handmaiden has a double role. The handmaidens sometimes clean up things which get dusty every day. So you clean them again and again, the cobwebs of confusion. But handmaidens also sometimes are the torch bearers in front, that when you're going into a dark channel, then the handmaiden will carry the torch in front of you. So both clarification and torch bearing can be done. The torch has to be lit again and again, and also the cobwebs have to be cleaned again and again. So in this way, I share some of my reflections with all of you on this very exciting topic of looking at science, technology, philosophy, and space, or looking at philosophy as primarily a methodological analytical tool. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It was wonderful listening to you, and we had surely a lot to learn. As you rightly said, technology has bridged the gap between us, and there is a lot of relief coming from the technology. And we do add a methodological feature to the essential elements like water, which I now know is a psychic phenomena. And science is seen as the deep personification of myth and is closely related to the human freedom. Thank you, sir. And now I would like to inform you all that our respected principal ma'am, though she has always joined us for our webinars and other events, but she is not feeling well today, so she will not be able to address us. And now I hope that our chat box will be full of questions. So now I request Premlata to take over for the question answer round.
Chat box. ठीक था.
I think sir was simultaneously taking up the questions from the chat box. Am I right, sir?
Yes, yes, I was.
So if you have any further question, Premlata, Sangeeta, you need to unmute Premlata. Sangeeta, are you there?
Yes, I'm there, but she is already unmuted.
Premlata, you are unmuted.
Yes.
So, sir, pros and cons of technology. We are able to, interact, but there are these little
Yes,
glitches
I know.
that.
I am in fact a frightfully technophobic individual. I
Same here.
and I had a huge amount of discomfort doing these online sessions. One, because I don't believe in these non-impersonal viewing people on screens.
Yeah.
But also I understand the power of it for and its use. So it has been enormously useful as well.
Yeah, that is why we thought that we should have, eminent personalities on philosophy addressing us, because once this is offline, we won't be able to have such interactions. Yeah, Premlata, you are there. Yeah,
Yes,
okay.
ma'am. Okay. Thank you, Mehak. Thank you, sir, and thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir, for your insightful words. Thank you for and thank you. It has been very enriching for everyone present here. So now I would like to start with some questions. Okay, so here I have question one. What should be our approach toward the use of technology in the present scenario where we are witnessing revolutionary technology?
Okay.
Should I repeat?
Yes, I really think that it depends upon what your purposes are. Um, and again, since we have been referring to the master again and again, the grand philosopher Aristotle, the idea is of measure. So you use everything to serve the purposes that it is meant to. So if it is to entertain, if it is to enrich in terms of knowledge, then you use it as far as it enriches your knowledge, and if it entertains you as far as it does. Uh, Excesses are really detrimental, and therefore, even in case of technology, so you're using technology for cooking, you're using technology for communication. So if it is to build bridges of friendship cross culturally, here is a great opportunity that you can have cross country friendships. You want to get information, you can get huge amount of information from everywhere. If you want to listen to old music, you can do that. So I don't think there is any recipe. It depends upon your own personal goals and aspirations. And what technology has enhanced is that it has increased your choices enormously, and of course made life more difficult, because now you can't blame that you have less choices. Like, this is the kind of thing which I tell all my students, that now they can't complain they did not get their references. We used to have a lot of difficulty in getting books. Now they can't say that. You tap a button and all of them are there.
True.
Thank you, sir, for explaining it so well. Question two. If humans are so complex, is it always harder to understand human behavior than to understand similarly functioning pattern in animals?
Oh yes. The human beings are difficult to understand, and philosophically we have a problem that do we understand the other mind, and we also have a problem, do we understand our own minds? And the problem is, do we know that we have minds? Do we know that other people have minds? Also, as Dr. Hemlata was mentioning in the beginning, that we have questions about artificial intelligence. Do computers have minds? When we talk about the minds as extensions, etc. So all of them are big philosophical problems, complex philosophical problems. But this is what makes them exciting. So human beings, as the afternoon began, have a natural desire to know, and they want to know more and more, and the more and more they know, they understand the complexity, and they understand the interrelationships. uh, Aristotle had said philosophy begins in wonder and it should end when there is no wonder left. So we know that we are somewhere in the middle of it. We have not really got to the end of the wonder, we have not got all the answers, but so has science not got all the answers. The complexity that we have of the human mind is very exciting, very challenging, but very intimately related. And so we must continue to do that. And same for the animal kind. We are more evolved animals. And so as we understand ourselves, we also understand the animals. As we understand the animals, so also we understand some part of ourselves.
Thank you for giving us broader perspective. Okay, so I move on to another question. Uh, what will happen to free will if we are going to become slaves to machines and technology? Will it even be possible for us to use our free will? So, sir, what are your views on that?
I see. This idea is only a metaphorical idea that we have become slaves of technology. No, we have not become slaves of technology, and we shall never become slaves of technology. So it's really that you say that no, no, no. Oh, you have become a slave of the bhel puri that you eat. No, you can't. You may get addicted to it for a while, but slavery is a strong word. where your entire free will is taken over by the technology. Never does that. It can't do that. And when it starts doing that, there are very similar ways of weaning you out. Just when some people say that you are addicted to cigarettes, then they would say, okay, what's the best way to get out of it? Is that gradually start taking something else, go for a walk, instead of a cigarette, start uh, getting a little toffee, and then you'll be weaned out. Similarly, if you're getting overly addicted to technology, the good idea is to take a morning walk, go for a little swim, meet your friends, not on telephone, on reality. So if you start feeling that it's getting overly addictive, that's the way to get out of it. But I don't think that we can be enslaved by technology.
Thank you for widening our scope of thinking, sir. Okay, so I move on to another question. So please shed some light on the dilemma of development versus conservation. We know that somewhere technology involves exploitation of resources and other problems. So how to deal with it?
I don't think technology in and by itself leads to uh, destruction of nature. It does not. Uh, Harnessing a horse, harnessing the river is not necessarily uh, depleting or destroying a river or a horse. Little children, when we were all growing up, and when we have little children growing up, we teach them uh, not to spit here and there. We teach them toilet training. We teach them how to do greet people, etc., etc. Similarly, uh, in doing that, we use pedagogical techniques. Similarly, when we go in outside our houses and when plants grow too many, we try and separate the plants on other side so that we can have a path. Does not necessarily mean that you are destroying them. So I don't think technology by itself destroys nature. But on the other hand, the fact is that we have in unlike any other animal in the universe, we have destroyed the universe very quickly using technology and science for our consumption and for exploitation. It has nothing to do with technology in and by itself, by science. And I think it would be rational for us to use a technology which actually is not destructive, which is conservational, and we can have a development which actually, in fact, that would be the only true development which conserves what is best. And we know that that can be done by a fuller understanding of the machinations of the world. And I'll give you just one small example. All of us, when we were in school, we used to do dissection of animals. In the past 20 years, the animal dissection in schools has stopped. We have virtual dissection of the animals. Similarly, there used to be animal testing of many, many things. Now you have laboratories in which you have a petri dish in which a particular organ or certain parts of that are kept and they are multiplied naturally and you can experiment on that. So less animal destruction, less destruction of nature, getting the same results in terms of technological knowledge pool. It can be done. So newer techniques with an ethical concern can be developed where you conserve and develop truly. So in and by itself, the ethical concern can take the aid of technology to actually build up a beautiful world, a beautiful cosmos, wherein all that is best is conserved for us and future generations.
Thank you so for being so informative. So here is another question.
Sir,
So
yeah, sir, I think we should take your permission first because there are one or two questions still to address. Is it okay, or shall we?
Yeah, you can carry on. Yes.
You sure?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
Premlata, just another one or two questions
Yeah,
because
one, two, yeah, not too
yeah,
many.
okay,
yeah, I can understand, sir. Sir, yeah,
sorry for
quickly,
thinking.
Premlata, yeah.
Okay, so yes, ma'am. So here is another question. As we are depending on technology so much nowadays, so will it not hamper human intelligence over artificial intelligence?
Mm, See, artificial intelligence is also a creation of human intelligence. One of the most important things is that the artificial intelligence has not come from nature or from God. We have created these forums. So how does the computer know more than you? Because 20 people have put their brains behind it and put the data in it. So it has been created by humans. Similarly, when we talk about artificial intelligence, it's a more patterned kind, less cumbersome way of adding on to that. I don't see the opposition. So human intelligence will not be, individual human intelligence may sometimes be forfeited by people, that people say कि ये काम मेरा चलो अब computer कर देगा, ये काम मेरा कोई और कर देगा. Sometimes people might do that. But it also comes with such a huge amount of help. There are old people now who will have a robo in the house who would sense that if I become unconscious, then they would immediately, the machine itself will immediately call the doctor. Now, this kind of a censoring uh, device, which can also make the correct kind of a connection without my necessarily having a servant or a person around me, is of enormous help and as a part of the artificial intelligence network. So I think I'm not so hopeless. I'm very optimistic about that.
Okay, thank you, sir. So this one is the last one. What is your what is your philosophy of leading a happy life?
Oh, a very, very beautiful and a very difficult question. I wish we had an answer to it. But the one answer that I have, or part of the answer, is engaging with people, as I am with all of you young people. So engaging with people, I think, is one way to a happy life. Engaging with them truly with respect and affection.
Thank you, sir, for being so patient and answering all our questions so well. Thank you. Over to you, Mahdi.
Thank you,
Sir,
Premlata.
just a second, Mehak. Sir, can
Yes,
we share
ma'am.
your email IDs with them if they have any
Yeah,
queries?
yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, Mehak.
Also, I'd like to inform that the feedback cum attendance form, the link for that has been given in the chat box. And now, after this wonderful question answer round, I would like to invite Mrs. Kirandeep Kaur ma'am, who is a teacher in charge, to deliver the vote of thanks and wind up the session.
वो दे दी थी ना उनको, उनके पास तो होगी.
Ma'am, kindly unmute yourself.
Unmute.
आपका तो वो मैम
मुझे unmute कर देना चाहिए.